Palestinian affairs analyst Osama Nazzal, who's in Jenin in the occupied West Bank. Good to have you back, Osama. Is there no recourse to law, whether it be domestic or international, especially for those who are detained without charge? The United Nations says so many of those detained just since October the 7th are being held without any sort of charge placed upon them.
Yeah, this is one of the most terrible legal gaps in the Israeli law and in the Israeli practices when it comes to the Palestinian prisoners. Israel detained since the 7th of October about 3,050 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, and they placed 1,450 of them under administrative detention without any charge, without any a trial, in violation of the international law and of the international conventions relating to the prisoners and how a state should treat prisoners. Israel really has nothing against these people, but it is like a kind of vengeance because of what happened in the Gaza Strip, and that's why it started this mass arrest campaign against the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Several human rights organizations, whether Palestinian ones or international ones, have organized many campaigns over the past years in order to force Israel to stop this kind of detention, administrative detention, as it is a violation of the international law. But Israel does not heed such calls and such campaigns, continuing to hold thousands of Palestinians under administrative detention. 1,450 of those who were detained since the 7th of October, but in total the number is over 2,270 as far as I know that are under administrative detention without any charge, without any trial, without having the right to appear before the court or to meet their lawyers.
What do we know about the conditions that Palestinian prisoners are held in? What do they say when they're released?
Really, some of them were released and they were interviewed by journalists, and they had videos really talking about the different patterns of torture that they were exposed to. People listening to us may not believe that such practices are committed by the Israeli occupation authorities. First of all, they torture them before the eyes of their children and their wives and their families. And this happened in Hebron when the child was screaming, "Don't beat my father, don't beat my father," while they continued to beat and to push him inside his house before the eyes of his wife and his children. And this is very common today as a kind of vengeance against the Palestinian prisoners themselves and against their children and their families. The worst form of torture nowadays practiced by the Israeli occupation army is undressing the Palestinian detainees, and they strip them naked completely, which is really non-human, and it is a violation of human dignity and of human norms. Just days ago, the Israeli prison authority released about 14 Palestinians from Ofar prison, which is very close to Ramallah in the West Bank, and they released them undressed, without clothes, even without the underwear. And the people from Ramallah went to the area where the prison is located and gave them the clothes and dressed them. In addition to other forms of torture like beating, shouting, shabah, which is holding them in a very difficult, unbearable condition for hours and hours. The solitary confinement for long periods of time, maybe for months and for years, causing psychological and mental problems for the prisoners. So it's talking about the patterns of torture the Palestinian prisoners are exposed to these days is a long, long story, and it might take us hours talking about that.
Osama, just based on what you've said in the past 2 or 3 minutes, do you think that is the main reason that Israel doesn't belong to the International Criminal Court? There are many people who say that's exactly the reason why the Americans are not part of the ICC, because they want to be able to send their army everywhere in the world and kill whoever they want, whenever they want, without being held accountable. Because of what you've been saying and the accusations you're laying against the Israelis just regarding prison conditions for Palestinians, could that be one of the reasons that Israel won't be part of the ICC, because it believes it wants to have the right to act when it wants, how it wants?
Without the least doubt, Israel is aware and mindful of all the crimes that it's committing against the Palestinians, whether the Palestinian prisoners or the Palestinian people in general, as all the world is watching. Over the past 48 days, Israel killed more than 14,000 Palestinian civilians in the Gaza Strip and wounded about 40,000. And you know that many of them lost their limbs and many of them are paralyzed. And this is a war crime. And Israel, being aware of the crimes that it is perpetrating against the Palestinians, it's doing its best not to join the ICC in order not to be held accountable before the ICC and the international legal and judicial system. And not only the war crimes, also the settlement building, which is, of course, these settlements built in the occupied Palestinian territory, whether the West Bank or Jerusalem, in violation of the international law. And Israel doesn't want to be part of the international judicial system, because if it is, then it would be required to dismantle its settlements in the occupied territory. And this what Israel is refusing to do. It is expanding these settlements at the expense of the Palestinian land and the Palestinian people. So it's doing everything possible to avoid the judicial system. And sorry to say that the international judicial system and the international human rights system appear to be very weak and very fragile, as we see all the horrendous and the heinous crimes being committed by Israel in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And we see nothing from these international bodies but words, lip service, but no action on the ground. The only action was the resignation by the guy from the Human Rights Commissioner office in the United Nations. Imagine that many people do like him, how the international body would be different and how Israel would take that into consideration.
Osama Nazzal, thank you as always, Osama.
You're welcome. Thank you.